Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the McLaren Vale EcoVineyards showcase. I'd like to welcome all of our attendees and also our presenters. It's great to see you all on the screen. My name's Dr. Mary Retallick from Retallick Viticulture, and I'm the co-convener of the EcoVineyards project, along with Lacey from the Wine Grape Council of South Australia, who you'll also see on the screen today, who's helping me co-convene this session. Today's session will run for 1 hour, and we have 3 guest speakers, and each guest speaker will speak for 10 minutes, and we have to provide an overview of the EcoVineyards project. And there'll be 5 minutes for questions at the end of each of these presentations. So please ask your questions via the chat icon at the bottom of the page. You'll see that there's a bar along the bottom, and you'll have the opportunity to either ask the question to everyone or to do a direct message or inquiry to a particular person. We'd ask for you to keep the audio on mute during each presentation just to reduce background noise. And the session will also be recorded so that this can be shared more broadly. So if you have that link come up on your screen and you're happy to do so, please do the accept on the screen. And if you'd like to share video so that we can see your faces, then you're more than welcome to do so. To begin with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country in which we meet today in McLaren Vale, that's the Kaurna people, and to also recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and also emerging. The EcoVineyards project is a fantastic collaboration led by the Wine Grape Council of South Australia in partnership with Retallick Viticulture. It's a national Landcare funded small farm smart grants round 2 and round 4 recipient. And we're also working with a myriad of 45 individual growers and also about 25 businesses that are all contributing cash and in-kind and goodwill and lots of support. And today's session has been made available through funding initially through the Adelaide Mount Lofty Ranges Natural Resource Management Board, which is now the Hills and Fluorio Landscape Board. And also a big shout out and thank you to the McLaren Vale Grapevine and Tourism Association. The EcoVineyards program is now in its 2nd year. We started in July 2019. So in the 1st year, in this particular round, we introduced 24 inaugural eco-growers who have all been working on their own EcoVineyards demonstration site in terms of establishing native and secondary plants that provide habitat for good bugs and provide biocontrol in vineyards. They've developed biodiversity action plans, and we've also run a series of workshops and field days. We've been working in collaboration with the Seaford Rotary, who have developed microbat boxes for us, O'Clock, who have developed predator perches and photo points, and also the Onkaparinga Council, who have printed our signage. We've developed a lot of fact sheets and we're just starting to collate some case studies. And we're in the process now of doing the face-to-face sessions for the end of the 2-year cycle. So today I'd like to introduce our special guests and eco-growers. We have Bondar and Ben Lacey, who are working on the Bondar Wines Rainer Vineyard project. We have Lulu Lunn from Tintookie Vineyards in Blewett Springs, and Sami Gilligan from the Wetlands Vineyards at Tintookie. So what I'd like to do now is hand over to Andre and Ben, who will provide us with a bit of background to their project. Lisa, if you can turn to the next slide, and you're unmuted. So take it away, Andre and Ben.
Thanks, Mary. So yeah, we had one main area that we planted as part of the EcoVineyards project, which was we were replanting an area in our own vineyard, and we'd recognised the part of that wasn't going to be great for the vines, so it made a perfect area for the project. And we planted, I think in the end, over 500 plants, 30 different species, which thankfully right now are really thriving. So we have a really healthy start to the project with a really, really broad range of plants.
Yeah,
anything?
No, definitely. It's taken really well. As Andre identified, it was an area that was fairly wet, and you can see in that photo, it's a bit of a sort of natural creek line. It's where the rows were going to get, we wanted to leave that creek line out. It's where the rows are going to be really short. So it suited a sort of project like this to plant. And yeah, it's come along really well. It's got a lot of diversity of species. Some of the real superstars that Mary goes on about the beneficials. So yeah, and it's quite a close planting, so it's going to be quite thick. It's got sedges, it's got native grasses, it's got a lot of ground covers, no real big trees, but you know, the cereas, she oaks, stuff like that.
So we had to spray out the area a couple of times initially, and then we planted. You saw the photos of that. And then to control the weeds, which is obviously the biggest issue for us, was controlling those weeds as they were popping up. You can see we added that straw, and quite thick, and we had that straw anyway, which we were going to use in our vineyard. But I think that straw has been great at helping to control those weeds, and really since we planted, we just have to hand weed intermittently to control the weeds as they pop up. So really in that area now, you know, it's really those plants, as you can see in that photo, it's really the plants that are dominating, the plants we want. And you know, they're thriving, and I'm really hopeful that in the next year or two, we'll start to see, you know, those insects that Mary mentioned, native birds coming in and utilising this space.
Ben, did you want to mention just the importance of timing of some of the processes that occurred? There's a photo just there, removing the garden.
Yeah, so that one was probably a little bit late, but yeah, I think particularly those ground covers, those things like saltbush, it's good to get the guard on, but you've also got to get the guard off reasonably quickly once they start to sprawl out. I think, timing as far as, you know, you've got to have good weed preparation. You've really got to get onto that. Good timing. We planted in the middle of winter when it was nice and wet. That coupled with the mulch meant that this site didn't have to be irrigated, and it's in a fairly wet spot, so it shouldn't need to be now. And yeah, so I think, you know, good success on survivability of plants is, you know, getting the site preparation right, planting the right time, and you know, then obviously controlling the weeds afterwards. And if you do all those sorts of things, I think you're sort of well on the way to getting things to grow well. And once you get it up to that sort of point, I'm hoping, and you know, it'll start to look after itself in many ways. It's probably that first year, maybe 2 years, that it's really going to take to make sure we, you know, get the area well maintained, and then, you know, hopefully it'll start to look after itself.
You've actually got a natural, I guess, wet section or waterway that you've planted into, which I think was running with a fair bit of moisture just prior to planting. Did that pose any challenges, or did that work in your favour?
We were a bit worried at the time, and there was sort of water seeping out the ground, but Dana didn't seem too worried. She actually planted sedges right by the edge of the waterway, because she said, well, they'll do well, because obviously that's what they're designed for. It is a bit of a waterway, but it does, I mean, it probably was running for a week or two while we were planting, but it doesn't stay wet forever. So the plants didn't get wet feet, which I suppose we're a bit worried about.
It's actually also in that waterway. It's on the side the water doesn't come from. The water comes from the other side, and then it's not in the middle. It's actually just up to the dry side of that waterway, if that makes sense. So it gets the benefits, but it doesn't get a lot of rushing water or flowing water. That's more on the other side of the little wedge.
Yeah, I'll get you to go back one slide, Lisa. And in terms of the strike rate, I think you guys are pretty happy with the, with the amount of plants that survived that process. We've had a tremendously dry period over summer, but they've done quite well, haven't they?
Yeah, incredibly well. And like Ben said, I think that the mulch really helped through that dry period, I imagine. And then we were fortunate when we planted, as he said, it was really wet.
Yeah.
And we had that good winter rain. But yeah, I think the mulch has been fantastic for helping with that.
It definitely so. I definitely think if we didn't mulch, we probably would have had to irrigate. There's probably no two ways about that through summer. I think, it just held what moisture we had in that soil for those dry months, and we're pretty lucky. Obviously, a milder summer. I mean, we did have a few. It was dry, but it was at least not super hot. So I think that helped.
And in terms of the weed growth that you got, Ben and Andre, can you just elaborate a bit more about how much of a challenge that was? And I remember when I visited in May, there was some wireweed, but it was sitting above the mulch, which I think would have made it reasonably easy to pick them off in clusters.
Yeah, it wasn't. You go on.
Yeah, I think initially we did one more spray. And then after that, it was really just walking around, hand weeding. It was
because a lot of them were in the guards. Like you couldn't spray some of the weed, because you were having the weeds from inside. Because obviously you had the straw mulch around the guards, so we found most of the weeds we had actually came from inside the guards. So that made spraying near on impossible. So that was where you pull them. But once you often had a big fat hen or something, and once you got rid of it, there was still the seedling was growing quite nicely underneath it. So it was really the weeds we were controlling, or those summer weeds like wireweed, fat hen, the winter weeds, sort of because we'd done all that spraying and then the planting and mulching, we didn't have so much problem with. So it'll be interesting to see what comes up this winter as far as weeds. But I'm hoping with that mulch layer now, that should sort of get it through. And like I say, hopefully following summer, we've got enough cover. The summer weeds might not be as big an issue, but we probably spent a couple of times, a couple of hours, a few hours, wasn't it, to hand weed it?
Yeah.
And it wasn't labour. I mean, it was time consuming, but it wasn't ridiculous. And I think it's obviously paid dividends.
And you've planted a range of creeping ground covers too. So I think the expectation might be, as that mulch starts to degrade down, the important thing is that we'll have some ground cover there through, some of the salt bush species and Myoporum and so forth. So that should help to provide that the functional biodiversity, so that we don't have those problem weeds perhaps creeping back into that site. And it's reasonably closely planted, which will help shade out anything that might come through as well.
And also I'm hoping also those native grasses, the same with the ground covers, that they obviously set seed this year, and as that mulch degrades, hopefully that provides an opportunity for those to actually spread as well. Yeah.
Please, if any of the audience have questions, if you'd like to type them into the chat bar, we can certainly ask them while we've got our eco growers here. Just in terms of the budget and the time spent on this project, we've developed a case study which outlines how some of those eco vineyard funds were spent. Each grower has up to $4,000 in cash, and each eco grower also contributed cash to the running of the program, but also their in-kind time. And I think you ended up getting 400 to 500 plants in the ground, but only spent about half of that budget. It was about $2,213. So that's a good outcome for that particular area. And the in-kind time was about 50 hours. Have you got plans to broaden out the plantings in other parts of the vineyard?
Yeah, definitely. You know, as for similar reasons, where there's areas where you know we need to replant here. You know, there's naturally falls areas that would just sit fallow, really, because you know, say because the direction of the vineyard rows, or there's little triangles that form, and I think they're the perfect spot, really, to plant these plants and introduce these insects, because otherwise, you know, they'll just be grass, or we'll just be managing them. Where I think what a great opportunity to extend
creek line.
Yeah, extend these plantings. Yeah, as Ben said just then, there's also a creek line here. You know, where there's olives and other non-natives, and it'd be nice to clean that up and do a similar thing.
Yeah. It's a great way to add functionality into what would otherwise be marginal sites on the property, or areas that you can't plant to vines, perhaps.
The good thing is, if you create enough of them, then you're going to create sort of this linkage up with them as well in many ways. For the, you know, you're not just centralising all in one spot; you're spreading them out.
Yeah, we've got a few questions that have come through. Thank you to Leanne Yench, who comments that's quite a list of plants. I think there's more than 30 different insectary plants there. And Leanne asked, how did you decide on those plants, or were you just after local and as much diversity as you could?
Yeah, we were guided a lot by Dana.
NRM, well, now what is it, Landscape SA? Yeah,
and really we talked a lot about our area being in that pink gum, which you've got in the case study. So these were all plants recommended to us by Dana, and then of course plants we'd worked with before, with you, Mary, with the you know, the Christmas bush, which we'd had a few plantings of previously. So yeah, we were guided a lot in those.
I think Andre was keen that we didn't have, you know, species that would attract, fruit fruit-eating birds, and also cause any issues with wine taint. So they were sort of two issues that we looked at, and I think you can see from that there's also a mix of ground cover and grasses and, you know, shrubs. So it's sort of getting all that. Dana was, you know, wanting to make sure that we got all the different stories catered for. So yeah, you got obviously got kangaroo grass right up to she oaks and everything in between. So you sort of, you know, without having eucalyptus in there, which, you know, we were worried about from a taint point of view. So yeah, it was a mix. It was trying to get that biodiversity, get the plants that were good bugs, get the plants that were endemic to the area, but also, you know, try and work within the confines of, we're still working in production agriculture and what suits what we're trying to do as well.
Yeah. The plants that we've got there on that slide, just from the left across to the right, the Rhytidosperma cespitosa, which is the common wallaby grass. And then we've got common everlasting, and then we've got the twiggy daisy bush. And that's a tremendous diversity, which also provides habitat for some of our native bee species. Some of the flax lilies provide fantastic habitat for them. But none of those plants are likely to attract fruitivorous or fruit-eating birds, but they do provide potentially fantastic habitat for all of the predatory arthropods, lizards, microbats potentially for some of the larger strata, and some of those kind of dense shrubby plants will also provide habitat to insectivorous birds, which all contribute to biocontrol. Just to finish off, I've got one last comment I'd like to make. If we can go back one slide, Lisa. We've got some fantastic signage, or it might be back another one, which has been funded from Wine Australia. And Andre, I'm interested in particular, just your comments from a winemaker's perspective and the use of these native plants, how that might help us to stand out in the crowded international marketplace. And this, I think, will also help to tell your story about environmental stewardship in terms of Bondar wines and the Rainer Vineyard too.
Yeah, I think you've made some really good comments there. I think that, you know, as far as my wine brand is concerned, you know, displaying to the world, which is really important, that we have an environmental conscience. And it's not just as simple as biodynamic or organic viticulture. It's more rounded and selective, particularly to us, our little spot in the world. And I think it's a huge advantage, actually, commercially, to show the world that we're doing these things, and we're doing them, you know, specific to our area, not just following dogma, you know, that's, you know, written in a book. It's actually specific to our area and specific to our site and our particular environment, I suppose. So yeah, I think it's a massive advantage for us as a wine company to show this, you know, this sort of work, and that's why I want to keep doing it and increasing the plantings in the vineyard.
Thanks, Andre, and thanks, Ben. When we chose these plants, they're specifically sourced from a pre-European plant species list, and for your particular location, that's the pink gum woodland plant community, which is Eucalyptus fasciculosa. So we're very keen to look to nature and to look what was in the landscape before it was modified. So we've tried to build that authenticity into those plant selections, because we know that those plants were there previously, and they're also naturally adapted to that site. And just in response to another question that was asked by Leanne, do you intend to bug sampling, or to do some bug sampling in the future to see what impact you see in the nearby vineyard? So the answer to that question is yes, we would love to do more sampling. In an area like this, there's a range of different ways that we can start to collect those metrics, and we can look at the diversity or the richness of those types of predatory arthropods. So that's both insects and spiders, but also the abundance. And we can do that in the vineyard. We can also use a modified sweep net that collects the bugs in the insectary area, and we can also use another sampling method called a vacuum sampler to suck bugs off of plants or close to the ground. So in the coming years, as this insectary planting starts to mature, it'll start to then flower and set seed, and then we'll start to see a huge influx of activity. So it's going to be fantastic to revisit some of these sites as they start to mature, so that we can potentially collect some of those metrics. So watch this space. So we might continue on, Lisa, and I'd like to introduce our next guest speaker. If you'd like to come off of mute, Lulu. So I'd like to introduce Lulu Lunn from Tintookie Vineyards, who's going to provide a bit of background to her project and some of the insights about what went well, pitfalls to avoid, and the ongoing legacy. So thank you very much, Lulu, and welcome. I'll hand over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Mary. Yeah, so I did something quite different to the boys. I decided to interplant, and in fact, that's the photo where we did quite a bit of it, interplant between the vines, so not in the actual mid-row, but under the vines. And so I actually grew most of mine that I used in the vineyard from Trees for Life or whatever seed I could get on a list. And I had some really good takes. So a lot of them, especially the saltbush, the ruby saltbush, grew really well. And a bit like Ben was saying, I perhaps sometimes didn't take my guards off early enough, but they spread really well. A lot of these photos, I think, were when they were fairly new, so there's not a lot there. I used different grasses, so the wallaby grass and the windmill grass. The windmill grass has really taken off. The running postman was a good one, but I didn't, when I grew them last year, or the year before, I didn't have much of a take, but this year I've got a stack planted ready to go out, and I'll just continue planting all of them. So I did it on 3 rows or 3 half rows, and sort of mix them around a bit just to see what would take. One of the pitfalls of this that I sort of wrote up in my thing was that when I went to, you know, as I kept looking at them, where I had deaths, the problem was I didn't actually mark on the sticks what they all were. So I probably lost about 10 or 15%. And as you said, it was pretty hot, but most of them I had under drippers. But then I didn't know whether I actually lost a whole species because they didn't suit the site, or whether they were just some of the others that died. So in future, I will make sure that they have name tags on them, even if it's just a quick naming process of putting in the initials. So at least I know what I have lost and what I perhaps shouldn't plant again. So because I didn't do that, I now have to go and replant them all and work out what the problem ones were. Actually, that one, the running post one, was great. That has flowered a few times and spread quite well. Weeding is a bit of an issue. I have hand weeded, but it's not so hard. So that's your creeping saltbush. That's been fabulous. That's really spread. And in some places, it's almost joined up between the vines, and they're fairly widely spaced vines. And there isn't much. I mean, this at the moment it's soursop season, and there are a few little bits coming up, but they're not too hard to get rid of. That one's also a great one, but it doesn't seem to. You can actually, that would have been last winter. The soursops, you really do have to weed in between those because they get covered up. So that was my the first thing I did. I'm lucky enough on my vineyard where it has trees planted throughout the whole vineyard. So it's all around the vineyard, and then I have gum eucalypts planted through the vineyard. So what I thought I might do with those is actually start to plant an understory. So there'll be bushes and also, again, some of these prostrate sort of plants for insectary habitat. And I'm yet to see how that goes. I also planted 6 rows. I'd pulled out some vineyards. So I planted 6 rows of just lots of different species, some that I grew, some that I got from the council very kindly, and they had a heap left over one year, so they just gave me a stack. So I just planted whatever it was. And they're growing really well. That's all under drip irrigation. Obviously, the weeding of those is quite interesting as well. I haven't used any chemical on those. And ideally I won't, but what I might do is do what the boys have done and just start putting a heap of mulch around. That's probably my best bet, because a lot of those are ready to have their guards taken off. I did buy guards, but I also bought the little weed mat. It's just quite a thin fibrous mat, and that helped a lot. But as Ben said, you still do get weeds coming up in your garden, so you've got to take those off as well. I also would like to plant some mid-row things. I actually had plants ready to go, but then because of the fires we had, where I saw some vineyards that were totally burnt out, it made me a bit nervous about having something that might actually work as a wick and come straight up to the house. So I'm now looking at plants that perhaps are a bit more fire retardant than burning. So that's, I'm yet to do that, but I still would like to do that. But I have started slashing a little bit higher. Again, it can be a bit of an issue if there's a fire, but just to make sure that there is habitat for the insects to survive. And as you can see, I'm still growing plants. I'm going to do some more Banksias this year as well. I love the look of them, and I think I know they are probably a bit rough with the birds coming in, but because we have so many gum trees, and the gums were planted probably about 50 years ago, and the species chosen were gums that would flower at slightly different times, and the birds do seem to prefer the nectar of the eucalypts, so it's not we don't have such a big problem with birds. Interestingly, the biggest problem we have with birds on this property is over the very back where there's scrub, low scrub, and the little birds aren't scared to fly in, whereas where you've got the big eucalypts, they're quite nervous about going into the vineyard because they can't see what predatory birds are in the trees, which was not really what I was expecting. Yeah, so that's sort of more or less my project, and I've really enjoyed it, and it's just made me think, I think, so much more about what I can do. and to think outside the square a bit of what I can do. So I will definitely be continuing trialling things. I also, actually, the other thing I've done, which I'm still yet to finish, but I have organised to have 3 rows of native grasses planted through 3 of my mid rows. Those I have sprayed out, and I think Ben did it years ago and said, you know, if the preparation's, you know, not good enough, then really you're spending a lot of money and probably not for no gain. So I'm in my 3rd year of spraying out, and I will get that planted after that, and hopefully that'll be enough to get that going. And I suppose a lot of that, because of the expense, I'm hoping that those seeds will spread a bit through the vineyard.
Are you working, Lulu, with Andrew Fernley?
I am, yeah.
Yeah.
So he's been, sorry?
So Andrew's got a tremendous diversity of seed that growers can potentially purchase as a multi-species mix, and certainly in other areas they've had up to 20 species all mixed together, both winter and summer growing grasses, and also low growing flowering plants. So I'm really excited to hear that you're preparing to put some of those plants in with his specialised seeder. I think that would look amazing, but be very functional in the vineyard as well.
Yeah, so I mean, it'd be great if that. So I'm sort of doing alternate rows. I have 2 together, but then I've now got alternate rows as well that I can pop them in. And yeah, ideally, I suppose, because it is such an expensive exercise, they will start to spread. And if I see good spread, well, then I could, you know, potentially just keep going and every year do a few more rows.
Thank you, Lulu. It's been great just to get that overview. I'm happy to ask some questions if you're happy to receive some.
Absolutely.
With the running postman, I think when I visited a couple of times, we were kind of on the fence whether it was going to be a really good plant or not. And I know running postman's a really fabulous plant from a range of perspectives. It's an early recruiter if you have bare soil, and it actually also fixes nitrogen. And you've got, you know, these very porous Blue Spring sands, so it might help in terms of, you know, the nutrients in there as well. So are you feeling that the running postie, as you call it, I like that, is likely to prosper and do well, or have you had frost conditions where it's not, you know, where it's been hit and you know, it might not be as good on your site? What's the general feeling?
I think it's pretty good. We are rarely frosted, but of course, you know, when it happens, it can, you know, be a bit catastrophic for some of those plants. But it died back a little bit 2 years ago, but it's gone on strong. I've only got about 4 or 5 plants actually in the ground growing, but they're looking good, and all of those survived, and they are looking better every year. Because it's very slow, and I don't know whether it is a little bit from our, you know, soils, our sands, with 0 nutrient in them, or whether that's just how they grow. I've probably had a bit more luck with the saltbush, because that's quite thick, and so it does actually work as a really good weed mat. Obviously, I don't want to end up with just a monoculture of those as well, so I will just continue planting other plants and testing and seeing what works.
You might be in a really unique situation there too, Lou, because you've got lower vigor perhaps on those sandier soils that actually lends itself to native plants who don't have a high requirement for nutrient inputs. In fact, they do better when you've got a more natural site with low, you know, a low nutrient loading. So, you know, that might actually work to your benefit there.
I hope so.
Yeah. With the weed matting, was that the jute mat that you used?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was pretty good. I mean, it breaks down fairly quickly, but often you just need to get that first season. You know, if you can get those plants established and get their roots done, then it's not such an issue. I mean, we've done a fair bit of hand weeding, but yeah, where the mat is, it's been pretty good probably for about 18 months.
Yeah. And in terms of your budget, you actually got a tremendous number of plants in the ground. I think there was something like 750, which is a really fantastic outcome.
Yeah, a lot of that was because I did those 6 rows, and we just made them as long as we had plants for.
Yeah.
So that's probably helped. We've gone back and done a few replants, but it hasn't been too bad really. And
Yeah.
they're on about, well, we didn't measure anything, so they're probably on about 2 to 3 metre plantings.
And some of those plants were also donated from the Onkaparinga Council.
Yes.
Too.
Yeah.
A big thank you to them.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I think they gave me an extra 200 plants, so which is why I think initially I was thinking I'd do one line of plants up against the vineyard, but I had the space, so it seemed like a good thing to do just to keep going.
Yeah, and I think you spent about $2,000 to date out of your $4,000 budget, with the remainder will be spent on the native grasses in
Yeah, yeah.
And I think you captured at least 74 hours, but that's quite a conservative estimate in terms of how much time and effort went into getting those plants in the ground.
Yeah, a lot of that was weeding. I mean, planting, obviously, it takes a while to plant that many plants, plus running drip irrigation. But a lot of it was going back and weeding and checking drippers, and, you know, because we could slash up quite close to the plants. This is where we did the 6 rows, but we couldn't get right in there. The drip line sort of disappeared, and if you'd lost a plant, you then had to find it, because at that stage we didn't have grow guards on things. So now it's a lot easier. You can go straight into where the grow guard is, and you can check your dripper, so we don't have to haul up in snaky summer a heap of pipe with a stick ready to in our gum boots. So yeah, I think I've made that system a lot better, so it won't be quite so hard to manage in the future. And now the plants are bigger, that makes it a lot easier, because you don't need to weed quite as hard.
Yeah. We do have one question specifically for you, Lulu, and one of our guests, I think it might be Rachel, was asked, how are the cottontails going?
The what?
The cottontails. That's referring to the question that we had.
They disappeared years ago. And in fact, you and I put some more things in, and it's really weird, because I always think that our sands often are so dry that you wouldn't expect much microbial stuff happening under the soil, but it's obviously all there and happening, because even those I went to dig up and I could barely find anything. And they were the little bits of cotton that you gave us, but I mean, the undies, I think we found one bit of elastic.
So just for context, for those that didn't attend the field day at Lulu's last August, we looked at soil health, and part of looking at soil health and water infiltration, and also the strength of the soil using a penetrometer, is that we use calico strips, which provide a cellulose substrate for the microbes to eat. And we put 15 centimetres of a calico strip, which is a cotton strip, just straight down vertically into the ground. And we're a bit cheeky. We also put in some cottontail ladies' briefs, and they go in horizontally about 5 to 10 centimetres, probably 7.5 centimetres just below the surface. And I didn't hold out high hopes, Lulu, for your site. And I think they were buried for 5 weeks. Because your site is so free draining, we tend to find that there's more microbial consuming of those substrates if there's more moisture on, say, a loam or a loamy clay soil. But after 5 weeks in your Blewett Springs sand, there wasn't much left to see. And you're right, there's just a bit of elastic left in a few photos that we put on our social media feeds.
I know, I was amazed, and actually it's given me heart a bit, that, you know, sometimes you feel like working pretty hard, and you're not sure if you're getting anywhere, but it's really nice to know that there are plenty of organisms and things happening under the soil.
No, it's fantastic to see, and just to receive that feedback from you, Lulu, that you've now been a viticulturalist for more than 35 years, and you have renewed excitement about viticulture and what you're seeing around you, for me, is just really heartwarming. So thank you for that really kind feedback as well.
Oh, thank you for having me involved in the program. It's been great.
No, it's really been fantastic. Thank you, Lulu, and we look forward to seeing how those mid-row plantings go, and when we've and also to quantify some of those ground covers. And once those plants have started to mature, I can certainly come out and we can start looking at what the good bugs are that are found in association.
And I'll send you a photo of the grasses when they're growing.
Sounds great, thank you. And label everything as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the comment that Leanne's written on our comment board, that it's just such a great story, talking about the high story, and then starting to fill in some of those old paddock trees or the understory, whether it's ground covers or mid-story. And Leanne makes the comment that there's a fact sheet, or there's some really good information about some of those paddock trees that have come from the Barossa Bush Gardens. So it's great to see that focus is elsewhere as well. And just in terms of the comment around fire, it's very topical, obviously, after the fires, devastating fires that we had in South Australia, in particular in the Adelaide Hills in December 2019, and then in Kangaroo Island in January 2020. So what I've done in our fact sheets is I've also prepared a list of plants that are reported to have fire resistance. And any plant, if it gets too dry, will potentially burn. But there's a range of attributes that plants have, whether they're high in salt or they're very succulent, or low in oil, which will start to reduce, some of the fire burden. Or in the case of the wallaby grasses, they might have only 2 to 5 tonnes per hectare of fuel load, which is maybe 1/10 of some of the introduced species. So it will be more of a cool burn. So there's some more resources available on the One Great Council website, which I'll allude to at the end of this presentation as well. And next up, our next eco-grower case study comes from Sami Gilligan. And I'm not sure if Sami's been able to join us today, but I'd love to be able to just share with you very briefly some of the insights from Sami's property, which is called the Wetlands Vineyard, and it's located at Tintookie. So Sami has a really high value site in terms of Indigenous significance, and the Wetland Vineyard is next to this natural wetland area, but you can see that it's been quite choked out by reeds, which will also help to filter the water. But in this particular section, Sami was very keen to be able to open up this particular area adjacent to the vineyard and adjacent to some existing insectary plantings that he'd already put in. So he did some earthworks just to be able to clear out the weeds so that we could potentially reset the ecosystem benefit that we would have in this location. So again, we worked with Dana and the team with the Adelaide Mount Lofty Ranges Natural Resource Management Board, as they were called a couple of years ago. So it's now the Hills and Flurio Landscape Board. And they were very helpful in terms of identifying the plant species list. Again, something in the order of 30 to 35 plants in terms of the diversity. And Sami has gone through and planted those plants just in that particular area using those core flute guards. And these photos were taken a month or so ago. So you can see that they're all popping their heads out of the top of the guards now. And he's quite happy, I think, with the take that they've had, given that they've been dry grown. And it's been a particularly dry period over those summer months. The season's only just broken. You can also see at the top of that photo an Ocklock photo point. So we're delighted and thankful to have Ocklock on board, who have not only designed a photo point for us, which allows us to take photos of before, during, and then after, but they've also designed a raptor perch, which we're in the process of distributing to each of the eco-growers as well, with the view to be able to draw in predatory and raptor bird species, which can help to patrol the perimeter of the vineyard. So Sami's had about a 10-year legacy on his property, and he's been planting insectary plants over that period, and some of those plants have bolstered an existing planting. So they're all starting to come to maturity now. And Sami has a vision to create a biodiversity trail adjacent to potential cellar door next door and the vineyard as well. So within this project, we've been able to focus, I guess, on a wetland area, and opening up clear water is also fantastic habitat for microbats who are wing drinkers. They'll come in and wet their tummies and then keep flying, and then they'll lick that moisture off of their tummies so that they can hydrate. And it's also really important habitat for breeding sites for, say, damsel and dragonflies, but also to provide a water source for insectivorous birds potentially as well. So you can see that lovely purple plant on the species list is a hardened Bergia via Lacey, and its common name is the native lilac, and that's just coming into flower now. So that picture's pretty indicative of what it looks like at the moment. And that particular plant's a climber, so it can be used as a screening plant, but it has these stunning purple flowers. And I've also found lots of parasitic wasp cases. So they're potential breeding sites and habitat for some of the parasitic wasps as well. So again, you can see a real diversity of plant species there. And part of what Sami would like to do is to tell that story. And again, thanks to Wine Australia, he's installed some signage, which then talks about the plant community that he has on his site and the types of predatory arthropods, so good bugs, insects, and also spiders that we find in association. So it's just, again, I guess, a next step in an evolving project that Sami's had on the go for some time. But it's fantastic to be able to formalise that now that the plants are coming to maturity, to be able to also tell that story to the general public more broadly. So that's it in I guess, a quick snapshot about what Sami has done. And we've got a few minutes spare where I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have as well while you've got me. And it doesn't necessarily have to be specific to any of these individual projects. It can be very general in nature. So if you've got any questions, please send them through. And while we're just waiting for any more questions to come through, I'll just also highlight some of the other ways that other eco growers and growers in general, no matter where you're located, can be involved in this particular project. So we've just secured some National Landcare funding, Smart Farm Small Grants Round 4 funding. So this means that this 2-year project will now roll into another 2-year period. So we're absolutely delighted to be able to then extend the scope of that project to another 25 or so eco growers, both on the mainland and also on Kangaroo Island. And one of the things that we're encouraging growers to do is, as they're planting native plants as insectary around vineyards, is to jump online to the EcoVineyards website, which is embedded on the Wine Grape Council of South Australia website. And you'll find there, if you go to the Wine Grape Council website, on the top, a drop-down list where you can also pledge your plants. So we've got some healthy competition happening between the regions, and we're absolutely delighted that we've got nearly 30,000 plants planted so far, and this was from last December. So we're probably well over the 30,000 plants, and if you start looking at seeds, as Andrew Fernley commented to me, it's probably a few million plants, so we can look at that in either way. So please, if you have done your own project, to jump on there. Leanne's also just provided a nice little comment about the Wine Australia project with those signs that we've seen at the Wetlands Vineyard and also at the Bondar Vineyard, is that we've developed some templates for a range of native species and the good bugs and insects and spiders found in association. So in the near future, all of those templates will be made available to growers via the Wine Grape Council website. And we have style guides, we have the templates for large signage, large format, as you can see here with Sami's project, but we also have quite small A4 size plant markers. And we also have some rough indication of, the cost involved for any grower that would like to put their own signs up in terms of the signage costs. So that will be made available broadly to everybody. It will give you the chance to then tailor an existing template, branding it with your own business, and to be able to then tailor that signage so that you can have it out the front of the cellar door on a biodiversity trail, or to highlight some of the work that you might be doing on your own project site. So thanks for that reminder, Leanne. So yeah, please jump on there and pledge those plants. We need to check if individual eco-growers have got their plants on there already. But if you're in doubt, we'll follow up with you just to make sure that we've captured them all. We also have some fantastic social media updates. So if you're on either Facebook or Instagram, our handle is EcoVineyards. Please jump on there and follow and like us if you'd like to keep in touch with the updates as they happen. So I upload photos on there on a weekly basis just to keep everyone updated. And there's lots of other resources that you can also download from the EcoVineyards pages. And you can see at the bottom of this one that we have the link there for the EcoVineyards fact sheets. So within there, we have some background about biodiversity action planning. We have some information about the types of good bugs we find in association with some key plants. We have the fire-resistant native plant selection. For those that have a waterway, we have a guest contribution by Phil Barron, who's our bird expert, that talks about sedges on the edges. And of course, in McLaren Vale wine region, we have a range of native plant community lists that I've procured for the EcoVineyard sites and broadened out the information to talk about some of those insectary values or benefits. We're also in the process of collating the case studies. So today we've heard from Lulu at Tintookie Vineyards and also Ben and Andre from Bondar Wines. So now we have a separate page, which is called Case Studies, and we have those two case studies highlighted on there that you can download. So that talks about what worked well, some of the pitfalls to avoid, the plant species lists, and also the budget and how that was executed to date. So please jump on there and download those resources, and we'd love for you to stay in touch. So if you'd like to find out more, please jump onto the Wine Grape Council of South Australia website. On the bottom of the main page, there's an opportunity to be able to sign in. The Wine Grape Council have a monthly newsletter, which is jam-packed with lots of really useful information. And there's usually information about the EcoVineyards project in there as well. So if there isn't any other questions that are coming through, what I'd like to do is thank you all for your attendance today. I've really enjoyed the conversation that we've had. Thank you for Lisa Benier from the Wine Grape Council for helping behind the scenes. It wouldn't be possible without Lisa's assistance. Thank you to our guest speakers, so Ben and Andre from Bondar Wines and Lulu, Lunn from Tintookie. You guys have been fantastic, and it's been a delight to work with you on this project. So I'm hoping it's just the start. It's been great to capture some of those really key learnings in those case studies. And thanks to all of the questions that you've sent through. I've really enjoyed the session. So thank you very much, everyone.